My name is Elice, and I am a homemaker. I met my husband, Caleb, through work, and over time, our relationship blossomed into marriage. Life with him has been peaceful, with hardly any conflicts. I've often heard stories about the difficulties of dealing with in-laws, especially sisters-in-law, but I never had such an issue. Caleb's sister, Judith, and I shared a wonderful bond. We would often go shopping together, and even traveled on occasion. In contrast, my relationship with my own sister, Elice, was strained. There were moments when I wished Judith could have been my real sister instead. Then tragedy struck. Judith passed away after battling an illness. When I received the news, I was shattered. I lost my appetite, and grief consumed me. I cried endlessly until the day of the funeral. That morning, Caleb left for the funeral home ahead of me. Not long after, my phone rang. His voice was tense and urgent. "Don't come to the funeral. Go straight to your parents' house." "I'll explain later," he instructed firmly. Confused, I did as he said. Upon arriving at my parents' home, they looked at me in shock. "Elice, isn't today Judith's funeral?" "Why are you here?" my mother asked, her expression filled with concern. I explained what Caleb had told me. My father's face darkened, and he let out a heavy sigh. "That makes sense," he muttered. "We just received a disturbing phone call from someone claiming to be one of Caleb's relatives. They accuse you of being a horrible person, and even threatened to burn our house down unless we paid them compensation. We thought it was some kind of scam or a cruel joke." He paused before adding, "Something serious is happening. Let's wait for Caleb to explain." Moments later, Caleb arrived, still dressed in mourning attire. His face was pale, his expression tense. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply. "I'm so sorry for what my relatives have done," he said. "I don't think they've come here yet, but just in case, we should go to the police." His words made little sense to me at first. He was out of breath, so I helped him sit and calm down before pressing for answers. "Caleb, what's happening? Why can't I go to the funeral?" He took a deep breath, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "Judith left a suicide note," he finally admitted, "and it was filled with accusations against you." My heart stopped. "What?" I gasped, stunned. "The note claimed you told her to die, that you mistreated her," he continued. "It even called for revenge against you. Some of my relatives believe it and are now demanding an outrageous amount of money as compensation. They also know where your parents live, so we need to leave immediately and report this to the police." My legs gave out, and I nearly collapsed at the doorstep. My mother rushed to steady me. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "Judith would never say such things. I never did anything to harm her." Caleb gently rubbed my shoulders, his voice reassuring. "I know, Elice. It's all lies. My mother never approved of you. There's a strong possibility she altered the note. Judith always spoke of you like you were her real sister. I don't believe any of it." Despite his words, an unsettling thought gripped my mind. Could a suicide note really be tampered with so easily? Even with my limited understanding of legal matters, the idea left me deeply unsettled. I was well aware that tampering with a document like that was a serious offense. "We don't have time to debate this. My relatives are already making threats. We need to leave now," Caleb urged. Following his lead, we hurried out of my parents' house and drove straight to the police station. I handed over a recording of the threatening phone call, along with a video I had secretly taken at the funeral home. In the footage, my mother-in-law dramatically read aloud a suspicious message, causing uproar among the mourners. The police took the matter seriously, but since no physical harm had been done yet, they explained that they could only increase patrols in the area and keep an eye on the situation. Although I still felt uneasy, knowing the authorities were involved brought me a small sense of relief. However, just as I started to let my guard down, something happened that shattered my fragile sense of security. As Caleb pulled up in front of my parents' house, we heard shouting at the door. Alarmed, we stepped out of the car and cautiously approached. There, standing in the doorway, were two middle-aged strangers, a man and a woman, yelling furiously. "This is your fault," one of them screamed. I froze. My sister, Elice, stood there, her cheek red from a slap. My father's beloved golf club lay broken on the ground, surrounded by shattered vases and ornaments. It was clear that while we had been at the police station, Caleb's relatives had stormed into my parents' home, unleashing their fury. Uncle, Aunt, my wife didn't do anything. Caleb shouted, "You just assaulted her sister. I'm calling the police." For a moment, they looked startled. "Wade, her sister?" the woman muttered, her eyes flicking to Elice in shock. Realizing they had attacked the wrong person, their anger reignited instead of subsiding. Without a shred of remorse, the man tightened his grip on the broken golf club and turned to me. "You think you can fool us with a stand-in? We know the truth. Judith suffered because of you. She wrote everything in her letter," he spat. Before he could take another step, my father lunged forward and grabbed his wrist with an iron grip. "You think you can just barge into my house, threaten my family, and lay a hand on my daughter?" he growled. I had never seen him so enraged before. The sheer force of his voice sent a chill down my spine. The confrontation escalated, voices rising, until the police arrived and took Caleb's uncle and aunt into custody. Once the chaos settled, my father turned to me, his voice softer this time. "Elice, are you all right?" Still shaken, I barely registered his words until Elice caught my attention. Guilt surged through me as I rushed to her side. "I'm so sorry, Elice. You got hurt because of me," I murmured. My father, looking exhausted, retrieved an ice pack and handed it to her. He sighed heavily. "I should have protected you better, especially with your wedding coming up." Elice pressed the ice pack to her cheek and offered a small, amused smirk. "It's not your fault. Besides, you're quiet and introverted, but you're a decent person. You and Judith got along well." Then, with a glint in her eyes, she added, "And anyway, this is physical damage, right? That means I can sue them and make some money off this." She said it so casually that I wondered if she was just pretending to be indifferent for my sake. But her unwavering belief in me, despite the accusations, reassured me. It strengthened my resolve. I couldn't forgive my uncle and aunt for hurting her, and I couldn't forgive myself for letting it happen. That night, Caleb made a decision. "I'm going to get proof," he told me. "Stay here. Call me if anything happens." He left for his parents' house while I waited anxiously. Word had already spread about his uncle and aunt's violent outburst, so no one else dared to bother us. Later, a formal meeting was arranged at Caleb's parents' home. My parents, Elice, Caleb, his parents, and several relatives, including his uncle and aunt, gathered in the spacious living room. His uncle and aunt seemed to have reconsidered their approach, but they still clung to their delusions, convinced they were in the right. "If you just admit to what's written in Judith's note, we'll drop everything," his uncle said smugly. "We won't even press charges." Elice, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "Oh, is that so?" she mused, barely glancing up from her phone. Her nonchalant tone seemed to irritate my uncle. He shot her an annoyed glare. Still unfazed, she continued. "Then, in that case, if you pay me $30,000, I'll drop my charges too. You hit me hard enough to affect my work. And let's not forget the damage to my dad's golf club." The room fell silent. Elice's words were casual, but her intent was crystal clear. "And don't forget my mother's vases," Elice added casually. Caleb's uncle turned red with fury. "Unbelievable. You're demanding an outrageous sum over a single slap? You two sisters are utterly shameless." Seething, he then lashed out at my parents. "You should be ashamed of raising daughters like this." My mother, ever composed, replied calmly, "Both of them are grown women. They speak for themselves. They don't need us to shield them like children. Isn't it natural to respond to rudeness with rudeness? Perhaps now you understand what it's like to feel the fear and pain of being attacked out of nowhere." Elice yawned, completely unbothered. "That's not even the real issue. The real problem is the suicide note. It was clearly altered, and that's what started this whole mess." At that, Caleb turned toward his mother. "So, Mom, was it you?" His mother, who had been fidgeting uneasily, visibly flinched. Well, I'm getting old. My memory is a little hazy," she stammered with a forced laugh. Ignoring her weak excuse, Caleb pulled out a sheet of paper. "This is Judith's actual suicide note. A heavy silence filled the room. Mom recorded in her diary where she had hidden it. "I found it," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "The note everyone saw, the one that accused Elice, was a fake. You altered to frame my wife, then read it aloud at the funeral to deceive everyone." His mother's face crumpled as he exhaled sharply. "You even wrote in your diary that you wished Judith's illness had happened to Elice instead. I can't see you as my mother anymore." That was the breaking point. She finally collapsed into tears. Meanwhile, Caleb's father, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. His voice was heavy with regret. "This is my fault. I never realized what kind of person my wife truly was." Turning to Caleb, he said firmly, "You don't have to be burdened by this family anymore. Go live your life in peace. I'll make sure she never contacts you again." Caleb nodded, then looked toward his aunt and uncle. "Now, about that $30,000. They stiffened. "You seriously expect us to hand over that much money to this brat?" His uncle snapped. Elice grinned. "Nice. That'll cover a brand new designer bag and a luxury golf club set. Lucky me. I didn't always appreciate her attitude, but this time I understood she was lightening the mood on purpose, trying to ease the tension for everyone." Just then, my mother-in-law suddenly clung to Caleb's legs, sobbing. "You're all I have left, my dear son. Please." Caleb, however, remained unmoved. "If that were true, then why did you treat Judith the way you did? You didn't even care about her enough to leave her final words untouched. You don't understand. Just listen." "Enough!" Caleb's father interrupted harshly. "How much lower are you going to sink?" Elice abruptly stood up. "This is getting annoying. Let's go. We'll settle the money later. Goodbye." Without another glance, she strode confidently toward the door. My parents followed, and Caleb took my hand as we left as well. As we stepped outside, he sighed. Even though she turned out like this, she used to be a normal mom. When we got home from school, she'd welcome us with snacks. It's sad that we'll never come back to this house again. 1 week later, when I was feeling a little stronger, Caleb placed a letter in front of me. "This is Judith's real suicide note," he said softly. "I waited until you were ready." With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper and began to read. "I adore you, Elice. My illness is exhausting. I'm constantly in and out of the hospital, and I feel like my mother doesn't care about me as much as she does about my brother. My father has always been kind, but you were the one I truly confided in. You were my emotional support. You kept me going. I know my parents have a considerable fortune, but I want you and Caleb to inherit my estate. If my mother gets it, she'll waste it. My father will understand. I hope this can bring you some happiness." Tears spilled down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. Caleb wrapped his arms around me. "Go ahead and cry. Let it all out." From that day on, I made a vow to live happily for Judith's sake. I carefully preserved her inheritance, determined to use it wisely when the time was right. Meanwhile, Elice settled with my husband's aunt and uncle for the $30,000. True to her style, she wasted no time indulging in shopping sprees. She even sent them a letter titled, "A thank you note for the $30,000, listing every extravagant item she had purchased." That was just so Elice. But no amount of money could erase the pain of being attacked. Surprisingly, after everything, my relationship with Elice improved. She even started inviting me out for meals, something I never expected. As for my mother-in-law, she spiraled. Her paranoia worsened until one day, she mistook a stranger for me, screaming, "It's your fault Caleb left." The police got involved, and though she only received a suspended sentence, her reputation was ruined. True to his word, my father-in-law took responsibility for her, but never allowed her to come near us again. Now, with all ties to Caleb's relatives severed, we are finally living in peace. Looking back, it was a terrifying ordeal. I feel sorry for my father-in-law, who had been unaware of his wife's actions. But I will never forgive my mother-in-law for trampling on Judith's final wishes. Caleb and I will continue forward, living the happy life Judith wanted for us. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Stay tuned.